again, guys. Here's another episode of these bedtime tales for you all. So tonight, we have a story picked out by Rose, which you all remember her from spring break. She chose for us to listen to I Can't Wear White, and it is by Suzanne Pickett. I didn't believe it, of course. It couldn't be true. Nevertheless, I glanced in the mirror. My dress was white and soft, as near like the description Derek had given me as I could make it. He was honest, at least. Better to have told me than for me to go through life wondering. But things like that don't really happen. It was a dream, a fixation. Derek is the poetic type, one who would imagine something like that. Well, I wasn't poetic, and I didn't intend to let something he had imagined spoil my whole life. She had the biggest, darkest eyes, he said when he had first began the story. I widened my own eyes. They were big and dark too. I knew what they could do to a man, and this time I was playing for keeps. Derek reached out and covered my eyes with his hand. They are like hers, he said. Exactly. Then he kissed me gently and began the story. I know you won't believe it, he said. It's incredible even to me. Nevertheless, it's true. You couldn't imagine a thing like that once a year for 5 years, could you? He had uncovered my eyes, and I turned on all the voltage as I looked at him. But his eyes were on his hands in his lap as he went on. I certainly wasn't thinking of anything like that, he said. I was coming home from a baseball game. It was Labor Day. Had been terrifically hot all day. But the night was cool, and I was as sober as I have ever been in my life. There had been such a crowd at the ballpark. It took me an hour to get my car out and start home. It was just 12 as I came to the lake. You know, the bridge is long and narrow. I didn't see a car at the other end, but I slowed down anyhow. Several people had been killed on that same bridge, so I wasn't taking any chances. Just as I started to pick up speed, a girl in a white dress stepped in front of the car. I swore softly and jammed on the brakes. What the? I began. Then I saw her face. It was the sweetest thing. Little, like yours. His hand caressed my cheek. With the clearest white skin and big, dark eyes. Her voice had a soft, breathless quality. I've had an accident. I wonder if you could take me home. Anyone with you? I asked. Anyone hurt? Oh, no, she said quickly. But I'm alone. I've got to get home. Daddy will have a fit. Where do you live? I asked. I had known her about 2 minutes, but already I would have tried to take her to the moon if she had wanted to go there. She gave me the address. I opened the door, and she stepped into the car. Derek paused a minute and smiled. My fingers ached to slap that look out of his eyes, but I kept them quietly folded in my lap. She was so sweet, so beautiful, Derek went on. I knew before I had driven a mile that I loved her. There was a sort of luminous quality about her. She had on a soft, white dress that clung to her. Some kind of filmy material, he grinned. I never did know much about such things. Her fingers were little and pink, like yours. He took one of my hands. I unclenched it and let it lie, little and soft and pink, in his. He rubbed the fingers and continued his story. I hadn't spoken since it began. I knew if I opened my mouth, I might do anything from screaming to sniveling to begging. And whoever this girl was, she didn't sound as if she would do anything like that. So I managed to listen quietly as Derek went on. I wanted to drive slowly, to never get home for that matter, but she was agitated, her face tense. "Hurry," she said over and over. "Please hurry." When I began to drive faster, she relaxed, laid back in the seat, and smiled quietly. But she didn't have much to say, and somehow I couldn't think of anything either. But it didn't matter. She wasn't married. I had learned that much. And I had the rest of my life to see her, to get acquainted. Derek paused, sighed, and was silent for a while. And then I managed to get past my lips without opening them too wide. My throat ached and my eyes filled as I tried to keep the tears from falling. This couldn't be Derek sitting here and telling me there was another girl. It just couldn't be. Derek loved me. I knew he did. He hadn't looked at anyone else since we started going together. This couldn't be happening to me. But it was happening. I couldn't bear this, yet I must hear it. This sudden pain in my chest, this sickness that swooped over me. And I must sit silently, listen sympathetically, while Derek tore my life into shreds. I swallowed. Derek bit his lips, and then opened them to continue. We finally came to the address she had given me. It was a big, old, white house, set back among some ancient oaks. A light burned, and then a light burned at the front. Another dim light shone from inside. I hadn't dared touch her, though I wanted to. But she seemed always about to run away. And I held my hands on the steering wheel now, gripped them to keep them there as I said, "I'll see you again?" She hesitated, gave me a queer look, and then said in a low voice, "Yes, you'll see me again if you..." She didn't finish the sentence. We both sat a minute in silence, and the front door of the house opened. I hurried to open my own door, stepped out and around to the other side of the car. I certainly didn't want her father to have a fit the first time I brought Opal home. I didn't know how she could have gotten out of the car so quietly and without me seeing her. But when I opened the door on her side, she wasn't there. I was a little vexed at her, and then I smiled. She was afraid, of course. She had seen that it was her father who was at the door, and she had slipped out of the car. But the man still stood at the door, and his face, in the dim light, had the saddest look I had ever seen. I started up the walk. At least I would speak with him, get his permission to call on Opal. I must have looked worried, for he tried to smile as I came up the steps. But the smile was worse than the other look. "How are you, son?" he asked. I was 18 then, and I thought myself very much a man, so I didn't like the son part. But I smiled back as best I could. I certainly wanted to do everything I could to make him like me, especially as I expected to have him for a father-in-law someday. But his next words staggered me. I've been looking for you, he said. What? I began. I'm sorry, but... I know, he said. I've never seen you before, and you don't know me. That's right, I admitted. And suddenly, I was afraid for him to go on. I didn't want to hear what he had to say, but I stood numbly, waiting for him to speak. You picked up my daughter Opal at the bridge and brought her home, didn't you? How on earth could he know that? I thought, as I nodded. When you opened the door for her, she was gone, wasn't she? His eyes were kind, yet with a haunted look. Yes, I said. But how? Opal was killed there on Labor Day night, 5 years ago, he said quiet. If he had exploded a bomb under my feet, I couldn't have been more shocked. No, I managed to say at last. No, it's impossible. She's as much alive as you or I. I understand, son, he said, and his voice choked. But I can't understand why. Why? She's all that I had, and she loved me. She never... He caught himself, swayed against the door. She was hurrying to get home. She knew I'd be worried. Someone has brought her home every Labor Day night since then. Oh, God, he groaned, and then put his hands to his face. Why can't she rest? Why must she keep trying to come home? Doesn't she know that I understand? As I turned blindly and hurried back to the car, I heard him pleading with her. Come in, darling. Daddy isn't mad at you. Please come in, Opal. Derek paused again, and then hurried on. I don't know what I did the rest of the night, but the next day I managed to get home somehow. I was sick for 2 weeks. Mother told me that I babbled and pleaded about some ghost that inhabited my dreams. She wanted to keep me at home for that year. I had already made arrangements to enter the university, but I persuaded her that I was able to go. You know the rest, or most of it. I changed after that, was quieter, studied more, and kept to myself. That's when I began writing. How I had time to write 2 novels and still keep ahead of my classes in all my studies. As you know, I never looked at another girl until I met you. Every year since then, I have met her again, taken her home. He took my hand and kissed it. You are so like her. His voice was husky. Sometimes I wonder if you are not a dream. I am no dream, I told him positively, and I certainly don't intend to disappear. No, he smiled at me. No, you're not a dream, except as a girl is everything a man can dream about. I love you, Angela. You. He kissed me fiercely. And no girl who has been... He hesitated and then went on. Has been dead for 10 years can come between us. But... He stopped again. I have to be sure to see her once more, or she might always be there, between us, and you understand. He looked at me pleadingly. Yes, Derek. I leaned my face against his. Yes, darling, I understand. That happened last night. Sunday night. Today is Labor Day. Of course he imagined it all. After all, Derek is a writer. The most imaginative writer of our era, critics say. So he has a right to imagine a dream girl if he wishes. Glad that he did. If he hadn't, he might have married someone else before he met me. And I'm glad that this dream girl looks like me. I don't believe it, of course, but nevertheless. My young brother Henry is a sweet kid. We've kept quiet a few things from Mother and Dad in our day. I can always depend on him when I need him. So he didn't ask a single question when I wanted him to drive me to the lake and leave me about 11 o'clock on Labor Day night. I did tell him that it was a joke and that Derek was to pick me up there. I knew, too, that Derek would be at the lake bridge at exactly 12 o'clock. So I wasn't taking any chances there either. I slipped a quart of water in his gas tank. It should give him enough trouble to make him a few minutes late. If the girl did show up, I'd get rid of her somehow, and I'd be the one Derek carried home. I had a black raincoat around me so that other cars wouldn't see me and stop as I hid behind a post on the bridge. I was glad I had on that coat. It made me feel sort of protected and kept the chill which came out of the lake from making me too uncomfortable. I huddled behind the post, shivered, and wished that I was at home. I hadn't dreamed that I would be so scared. The night was dark, silent, oppressive. Mists rose from the lake in eerie wraiths, some inhuman, others in goblin-like forms. It didn't take even a writer's imagination to people the bridge with ghosts. No wonder Derek had been fooled. But I did wish he would hurry. This was a lonely road, and no other cars passed. If one had, I think I would have thumbed a ride home if the driver had stopped. An owl hooted suddenly behind me, made me jump in terror. A nighthawk swooped after an insect or something. Occasional plunking noises came from the lake as a frog or fish jumped in the murky depths. I had never been so lonely in my life. I seemed glued to the post, as if I would be there through eternity. As if... I think I must have fainted briefly. I found myself lying on the planks, babbling quietly that I hadn't really seen a girl in white step onto the bridge, that it was just another wraith from the lake, and that I was as crazy as Derek. But I knew that I was lying, that I had seen the girl. I opened my eyes, sat up, and stared as I heard a car. But it wasn't Derek's car. The sound of the motor told me that. Thank God he's late, I whispered, and almost fainted again as I peered at the girl who stood in the headlights of the car. She was the loveliest thing I had ever seen. No wonder Derek couldn't forget her. If I were half as pretty as that to him. The car stopped. "Opal!" a hoarse voice cried, and a man leapt from the car to take the girl in his arms. "Daddy!" she cried, and ran to him. "Daddy, I've been waiting for you all these years." I saw them enter the car, and I was choking. I couldn't breathe. As the car backed up, to turn around. I flung the black raincoat from me, tried to run from the bridge, but I was falling. It might have been 30 minutes later. Derek said that he was late, that it was 12:30, so it must have been that long, that I came to in his arms. He was crying and kissing me. "Don't let it be Angela, God," he sobbed. "She's alive. She's got to be alive. Angela, speak to me." "Derek," I whispered, and tried to raise my arms. "Thank God," he said. "You're not dead. Angela." He said fearfully. "I was afraid for a minute that you were Opal. I was afraid that I had dreamed you." "Are you glad?" I asked. "Or do you wish that she had met you?" "Glad?" He kissed me again. "When I found you and thought you were dead." Well, we went to Mississippi that night and were married. I called my mother the next day and told her, then asked for Henry. He promised to hide all of the papers for the next week and save them for me. Derek and I bought new clothes as we needed them, drove on to the coast, and spent 2 wonderful weeks in California. We liked it so well that we moved out here a month later. We've only been home once since then. That was the last of August, almost a year later. Derek didn't want to do it at first, but I finally persuaded him to visit the bridge with me on Labor Day night. We took a blanket and huddled behind the post that had hidden me a year before. But I wasn't afraid this time. The night noises were friendly, and the mists only beautiful vapors from which one might spin dreams. We stayed until 3 o'clock. An occasional car passed, but no girl in white. A little after 3, we drove home. "You'll never believe it," Derek told me that night. "But Angela, I honestly did see the girl." "You still think she's real?" I asked. "I don't think, I know that she was real," he told me. "Does it matter?" I asked. "She hasn't really mattered since the first time I saw you," he said. And his kiss left no doubt of that. "But I wonder," he said later, "I wonder why she quit coming." I had the clipping with me. I had never been able to throw it away. I slipped it from the pages of my bank book and handed it to him. It read, "Father keeps rendezvous with daughter. Car runs off bridge. Father of Opal Fenton drowns in same spot where his daughter was drowned 10 years ago. Many think it was suicide. He had brooded over the death of Opal for years, talked of her to his neighbors as if she were still alive. Others think that it was an accident, but this reporter wonders. There seem to be too many coincidences. The accident happened at the same place, the Lake Bridge, the same night, Labor Day, and the same hour, midnight, according to the coroner's report. Whatever it was, suicide or accident, it seems touching and fitting that these two, father and daughter, who, according to report, loved each other with more than ordinary love, are together at last. Derek was silent for a while after he read the clipping. Then his voice was gentle as he turned to me. "You knew?" he said. "You knew?" "Yes," I whispered. He took out his lighter, flipped it, held the clipping in the flame, then crushed it in the ashtray. "It's over now," he said. "Finished. Let's never talk of it again." I agreed. But sometimes I wonder, with my dark eyes and fair skin, white is my most becoming color. But Derek will never let me wear it. I bought a white dress once. And anyhow, I don't blame Derek. You see, I can't forget her myself. Have pleasant nightmares, everybody.